Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship and looked at the stars ahead. The Earth vessel Horizon Dawn was 3 days into what should have been an easy trip to the outer colonies. They were carrying food, medicine, and basic supplies to the small human settlements on the edge of known space. It was routine work, but someone had to do it, and Jake took pride in making sure the colonists got what they needed. The bridge was quiet except for the soft hum of the ship's engines. Lieutenant Amy Carter sat at her station monitoring communications while Chief Engineer Pete Collins checked the ship's systems from his post. The crew of 28 humans had been together for almost 2 years, and they worked well as a team. Jake trusted each of them with his life, and they trusted him to make the right decisions when things got difficult. Amy suddenly looked up from her console with a frown on her face. She pressed her earpiece deeper and listened carefully to something only she could hear. After a few seconds, she turned to face Jake with concern in her eyes. "Sir, we have a distress signal coming in," she said. "It's very weak and hard to make out, but someone is definitely calling for help." Jake walked over to her station and looked at the display screen. The signal was indeed weak and kept fading in and out like a radio station that was too far away. He could see coordinates showing the location of whoever was sending the distress call. "Can you tell what kind of ship it is?" he asked Amy. She worked at her controls for several minutes trying to clean up the signal. Finally, she managed to get a clearer reading. "Sir, it appears to be a Zilani merchant vessel. The signal is automated and keeps repeating the same message asking for immediate help." Jake knew about the Zilani from his years in space. They were a peaceful species that made their living by trading goods between different worlds. They were small beings about 5 feet tall with pale skin that looked almost like crystal in the right light. The Zilani had advanced technology, but they were not fighters. They relied on treaties and trade agreements to keep them safe instead of weapons. Pete Collins looked up from his engineering station with worry on his face. "Captain, that sector has a bad reputation. Pirates like to hunt there because most ships avoid it. This could be a trap." Jake stared at the coordinates on the screen. The location was indeed in a dangerous area where several ships had disappeared over the past year. Pirate crews were known to use fake distress signals to lure other vessels into ambush. Once a ship came to help, the pirates would attack and steal everything valuable. "What do you think we should do, sir?" Amy asked. The smart thing would be to ignore the signal and continue on their mission. The colonies were waiting for their supplies, and Jake had a responsibility to his crew and cargo. Getting involved in a potential pirate trap could get them all killed or captured. But if the distress call was real, then whoever was out there would die without help. Jake made his decision quickly. "Set course for those coordinates?" "Full speed." "Sir, are you sure?" Pete asked. "We could be flying right into trouble." "Maybe," Jake replied. "But if someone really needs help and we just fly away, I won't be able to live with myself." "Prepare the ship for possible combat just in case." The Horizon Dawn changed course and headed toward the source of the distress signal. As they got closer, Amy was able to get more information about what they might find. The automated message was definitely coming from a Zilani trading ship called the Crystal Wind. The ship reported multiple hull breaches and life support failures, with 43 crew members still alive but in critical condition. When they finally reached the location, Jake could see why the Zilani were in trouble. The Crystal Wind was drifting powerless in space with large holes torn in its hull. Debris floated around the damaged ship, showing where weapons had blasted through the metal walls. It was clear that pirates had attacked the vessel and left it to die after taking what they wanted. "No sign of the attacking ships," Amy reported. "They must have finished their work and moved on." Jake ordered his crew to dock with the Zilani ship and begin rescue operations immediately. What they found inside was heartbreaking. The small crystalline beings were huddled in the few sections that still had air and heat. Many were injured, and all of them were weak from lack of food and water. The ship's captain was an elderly female named Kira Voss, who had stayed conscious to coordinate the survival efforts of her crew. "Why do you help us?" Kira asked Jake when he found her in what remained of the ship's bridge. "Your people and mine have no alliance. You gain nothing by saving us and risk much," Jake looked at the small being who was clearly dying but still worried. About her crew? Because it's what decent people do, he said simply. When someone needs help, you help them if you can. Pete Collins worked for 18 straight hours to rig emergency life support systems that could keep both humans and Zelani alive. The rescued beings were brought aboard the Horizon Dawn, where the human crew shared their food, water, and medical supplies. Several crew members gave up their own quarters so the Zelani would have places to rest and recover. Amy organized teams to care for the injured, while Jake plotted a course to the nearest safe port where the Zelani could get proper medical attention and contact their government. The rescue operation took almost a full day, but all 43 Zelani survivors were saved. Unfortunately, the crystal wind was too damaged to repair and had to be abandoned. During the 3-day journey to safety, Kira Voss slowly recovered her strength. She spent hours talking with Jake about her people and their way of life. The Zelani were traders and diplomats who believed in the power of memory and gratitude. They kept detailed records of every kindness shown to them and every debt they owed. "My people have long memories, Captain Morrison," Kira told him. "We never forget those who help us when we are helpless. This rescue will be remembered for generations." Jake didn't think much about her words at the time. He was just glad they had been able to save lives and do the right thing. But Kira's promise would prove to be more important than anyone could have imagined. 3 weeks later, the Horizon Dawn docked at Kepler's Rest, a large trading station that served as a meeting point for dozens of different species. Jake Morrison watched through the viewport as Zelani ships approached the station to collect the survivors his crew had rescued. The small crystalline beings had recovered well during the journey, but they were eager to return to their own people and their homeworlds. The trading station was busy as always, with ships coming and going at all hours. Merchants from across the galaxy gathered here to buy and sell goods, share news, and make deals. The station's corridors were filled with beings of every shape and size imaginable. Jake had visited Kepler's Rest many times over the years, but he never got tired of seeing the incredible diversity of life that existed among the stars. Kira Voss had insisted on staying aboard the Horizon Dawn until the very last moment. She wanted to personally thank every member of Jake's crew for their kindness and sacrifice. The elderly Zelani had regained much of her strength during the journey, but Jake could still see the effects of her ordeal in the way. She moved carefully and spoke in a soft voice. "Captain Morrison," she said, as they stood together in the ship's main corridor, "I must speak with you before we part ways." Jake nodded and led her to his private quarters where they could talk without interruption. The room was small and simple, with just a desk, a chair, and a narrow bunk. Personal items were kept to a minimum on a working ship, but Jake had a few photos of Earth and some books that he enjoyed reading during quiet moments. Kira looked around the modest room with interest. "You live simply for someone with such power and responsibility," she observed. "Space doesn't allow for luxury," Jake replied. "Besides, I've never needed much to be happy." The Zelani captain reached into a small pouch she carried and pulled out what looked like an ordinary crystal pendant. It was about the size of a human thumb and seemed to glow with a faint inner light. The crystal was perfectly clear except for tiny flecks of color that moved slowly through its center like living stars. "This has been in my family for over 200 years, Kira said as she held the pendant carefully in her hands. "It may look like a simple piece of jewelry to your eyes, but among my people it represents something much more valuable." Jake looked at the crystal with curiosity but didn't reach for it. He had learned over the years that many alien cultures had strict rules about touching sacred or important objects. "What does it represent?" he asked. "A debt that must be repaid," Kira said simply. "When someone saves your life or the lives of your family, you owe them a debt that can never be forgotten. This crystal is a symbol of that obligation." She held the pendant out to Jake, who hesitated before taking it. The crystal felt warm in his hand and seemed to pulse gently like a slow heartbeat. "Kira, I can't accept this. My crew and I were just doing what anyone would do in that situation." The elderly Zelani shook her head firmly. "Captain, you do not understand the true nature of what you accomplished. When you saved my ship, you did not just rescue 43 individuals. Among those you saved were members of 7 different trading families, including my own granddaughter, who now serves in our government's diplomatic corps." Jake frowned as he tried to understand what she was telling him. "I still don't see why." "That makes such a difference." Kira smiled, and her crystalline features seemed to glow with inner light. "Those 43 Zilani will spend the rest of their lives in positions of influence and power. They will tell the story of human kindness to everyone they meet. They will build relationships and alliances based on gratitude for what your species did for us." "You're giving me too much credit," Jake said. "Any decent person would have responded to that distress call." "Perhaps," Kira replied, "but not every species produces decent people as consistently as yours does. In my 2 centuries of life, I have seen many acts of kindness and many acts of cruelty. Your people seem to choose kindness more often than most." Jake tried once more to return the pendant, but Kira refused to take it back. "This crystal has been passed down through my family line for generations. Each time it has been given to someone who showed extraordinary kindness to a member of my clan. You are only the 4th person to receive this honor. What happened to the others who received it?" Jake asked. "The first was a trader who saved my great-grandmother from slavers. Years later, when his own ship was captured by pirates, every Zilani merchant in the sector came to his rescue. The second was a doctor who treated my grandmother's plague without asking for payment. When his colony was threatened by famine, Zilani ships arrived with enough food to last 3 years." Jake was beginning to understand the significance of what Kira was telling him. "And the third, a military officer who protected a group of Zilani refugees during a border war. When his fleet faced overwhelming odds in battle, thousands of ships appeared to fight alongside him. Ships from every species that had been helped by those refugees over the years." The crystal pendant suddenly felt much heavier in Jake's hand. "Kira, this is too much responsibility. I don't want anyone to feel obligated to help humans because of something I did." The elderly Zilani placed her small hand on Jake's arm. "Captain, the debt already exists whether you accept this crystal or not. My people will remember what you did for the rest of our lives. Our children will remember, and their children after them. The pendant is simply a way for you to call upon that debt if the time ever comes when you need help." "I hope that time never comes," Jake said quietly. "So do I," Kira replied. "But the galaxy is a dangerous place, and young species like yours face many challenges. If humans ever find themselves in desperate need, you will know how to contact us." She showed Jake how to activate a small communication device built into the crystal. It would send a signal on frequencies used by Zilani traders throughout the galaxy. Simply speak your name and location into the crystal and word will spread faster than you can imagine. Later that day, Jake stood in the docking bay and watched as the rescued Zilani boarded the ships that had come to take them home. Each of them stopped to thank him personally before leaving. Many of them were young adults who would go on to have children and grandchildren of their own. All of them would carry the story of human kindness with them for the rest of their lives. Kira was the last to board her transport. She paused at the airlock and looked back at Jake one final time. "Remember, Captain Morrison, the Zilani never forget a kindness. And we have very long memories." After the Zilani ships departed, Jake returned to his quarters and placed the crystal pendant in a small box with his other personal items. He didn't expect to ever need it, but he would keep it safe as Kira had asked. The Horizon Dawn resumed its journey to the outer colonies where settlers were still waiting for their supplies. Years passed and Jake rarely thought about the crystal or the promise Kira had made. He was promoted to admiral and given command of larger fleets. The pendant remained in his possession, moved from ship to ship as his career advanced. It would be 15 years before he remembered Kira's words and understood their true meaning. Admiral Jake Morrison stood in the command center of Earth's orbital defense station and stared at the tactical display that showed humanity's darkest hour approaching. 15 years had passed since his rescue of the Zilani crew, and he had risen through the ranks to become one of Earth's most senior military commanders. The young captain who had answered a distress call out of simple decency was now responsible for defending Humanity's homeworld against an enemy that wanted nothing less than complete extinction. The hegemony had declared war on Earth 6 months ago, and their advance had been devastating. 12 different alien species had joined together with the single goal of wiping out every human in the galaxy. They claimed that humanity was too dangerous to be allowed to survive and grow stronger. According to intercepted communications, the hegemony leaders believed that humans would eventually threaten all established civilizations if they were not destroyed immediately. Jake studied the reports from the outer colonies with growing despair. New Shanghai had fallen 3 weeks ago after a brief but brutal battle. The colony of 2 million people had been completely destroyed with no survivors. Port Victoria had lasted slightly longer, but the result was the same. Every human settlement the hegemony encountered was reduced to lifeless rubble and ash. Commander Lisa Bennett approached Jake's position with the latest intelligence update. She had served under his command for 5 years and had never seen him look so defeated. Sir, the long-range scouts have confirmed the size of the main hegemony fleet. They're reporting over 3,000 capital ships plus support vessels. Jake closed his eyes and tried to push down the fear that threatened to overwhelm him. 3,000 ships was more than 10 times the size of Earth's entire fleet. Even if they gathered every human vessel in the solar system, they would still be hopelessly outnumbered. The hegemony had superior technology, better weapons, and experienced crews that had been fighting wars for centuries. "How long until they reach Earth?" Jake asked, though he already knew the answer would not be good. 6 days, sir, Lisa replied. Maybe 7 if they stop to refuel at the Titan station. Jake nodded and tried to think of some strategy that might give humanity a chance. Earth's fleet consisted of 247 ships, including converted civilian vessels that had been hastily fitted with weapons. Many of the crews were inexperienced volunteers who had never seen real combat. They were brave and determined, but courage alone would not be enough against such overwhelming odds. The tactical computer had run thousands of simulations, and the result was always the same. In the best-case scenario where everything went perfectly, for the human forces, they might destroy a few hundred enemy ships before being completely wiped out. The most optimistic projections gave humanity a 5% chance of survival, and even those estimates assumed the hegemony would make serious mistakes. Jake walked to his private office and sat down at his desk to write what might be his final report to Earth Command. He wanted to record the true situation so that if any humans somehow survived, they would understand what had happened. The people of Earth deserved to know that their military had done everything possible even when faced with impossible odds. As he worked on the report, his eyes fell on a small wooden box that sat in the corner of his desk. Inside was the crystal pendant that Kira Voss had given him 15 years ago. Jake had carried it with him through every promotion and assignment, but had never seriously considered using it. The debt the Zilani owed was for saving 43 lives, not for fighting a war against humanity's enemies. He picked up the crystal and held it in the light from his desk lamp. The tiny flecks of color still moved slowly through its center like living stars. Kira had said the Zilani never forgot a kindness, but Jake doubted they would be willing to fight and die for humans they had never met. The Zilani were traitors, and diplomats, not warriors. A soft knock on his office door interrupted his thoughts. Lisa Bennett entered with another batch of reports from the intelligence division. Her face was grim as she placed the documents on his desk. "Sir, we've received updated information about the hegemony fleet composition," she said. "It's worse than we thought. They have battle cruisers from the Corvan Empire, assault carriers from the Thakari Federation, and siege platforms from at least 6 other major powers." Jake scanned the report and felt his last hopes fading away. The Corvan were known throughout the galaxy for their military prowess. Their battle cruisers could destroy entire planets if given enough time. The Thakari assault carriers launched swarms of fighter craft that could overwhelm any defense system. Together, they represented the combined military might of half the galaxy. "Have all our ships reached the staging area?" Jake asked. "Yes, sir. The fleet is assembled and ready for battle. Captain Rogers is requesting final orders." Jake looked at the crystal pendant one more time and made a decision that surprised even himself. Lisa, I need you to contact the communications division. Have them prepare a message on all Zilani trading frequencies? Sir, Lisa looked confused. The Zilani don't have any military forces. They're strictly neutral in all conflicts. No, Jake replied. But I made a promise 15 years ago, and I need to keep it. Lisa left to carry out his orders while Jake activated the communication device built into the crystal pendant. He wasn't sure what he was going to say or even if anyone would respond. The Zilani trading networks covered thousands of light years, but most of their ships were far from Earth and would take weeks to arrive even if they wanted to help. To his surprise, the response came within 2 hours. The aged face of Kira Voss appeared on his personal communication screen. She was older now with more lines around her crystalline features, but her eyes were still sharp and intelligent. Behind her, Jake could see the interior of what looked like a much larger ship than the merchant vessel he had rescued years ago. Admiral Morrison, she said, and Jake could hear warmth in her voice, despite the poor quality of the transmission. I wondered if this day would come. You still have the pendant? I do, Jake replied, holding up the crystal. Kira, I want you to know that I'm not calling to collect on any debt. I just wanted to say goodbye before the end comes. I wanted someone to remember that we tried to do the right thing. There was a long pause before Kira responded. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of authority that came with high position. Admiral, you misunderstand the nature of the debt we owe you. When you saved my ship 15 years ago, you changed the course of history in ways you never imagined. Jake frowned, not understanding what she meant. Kira, we're facing extinction. The hegemony has 3,000 ships, and we have less than 300. There's nothing anyone can do to change that. You are wrong, Admiral. Kira said firmly. Those 43 Zilani you rescued have spent the last 15 years in positions of great influence. They have told your story to every species they encountered. They have built networks of gratitude and obligation that span half the galaxy. I still don't understand. Among those you saved was my granddaughter, who now leads our diplomatic corps. There was young Vec, who became a trade negotiator with the Korathi. There was Myra, who married into the Altarian royal family. Each of them carried the memory of human kindness into their new lives and positions. Jake felt a spark of hope for the first time in months. What are you telling me? I am telling you, Admiral, that the Zilani remember every kindness, and we have taught others to remember as well. The debt you are calling in today is not owed by 43 individuals. It is owed by hundreds of species across the galaxy who have heard the story of human compassion and decided they want to be part of that story. Kira's image smiled, and Jake could see determination in her crystalline features. Admiral Morrison, by the authority given to me by the Zilani Trade Confederation, I hereby call in the debt owed to humanity. Help is coming. Admiral Jake Morrison ended his communication with Kira Voss and sat back in his chair, trying to process what he had just heard. The elderly Zilani had spoken with such confidence about help coming, but Jake found it hard to believe that anyone would risk their own people to save humanity. The galaxy was a dangerous place where most species looked out for themselves first and worried about others only when it benefited them, Commander. Lisa Bennett returned to his office with a puzzled expression on her face. Sir, the communications division reports unusual activity on multiple alien frequencies. Ships are sending messages in dozens of different languages, and some of the traffic seems to be headed toward Earth. Jake felt his heart skip a beat. What kind of ships? Unknown, sir. The signatures don't match anything in our databases. Long-range sensors are picking up hyperspace distortions, but we can't identify the sources. Jake stood up and walked quickly toward the command center with Lisa following close behind. The main tactical display showed the positions of all known ships in the solar system. Earth's fleet was deployed in defensive positions around the planet, while civilian vessels had been moved to the far side of the moon for safety. Everything looked normal except for a series of energy readings at the edge of sensor range. Captain Rogers is requesting orders, sir, the communications officer reported. Should the fleet maintain current positions? Jake studied the display and tried to decide what to do. If Kira was telling the truth, then friendly ships might be arriving soon. But if this was some kind of hegemony trick, then Earth's defenses could be walking into a trap? Tell all ships to remain alert but hold their current positions. I want every sensor focused on those energy readings over the next several hours. Jake watched in growing amazement as more and more ships appeared at the edge of the solar system. The first arrivals were clearly Zilani vessels with their distinctive, crystalline hulls that caught and reflected light like prisms. But they were followed by ship designs that Jake had never seen before. Some were long and sleek, while others were massive and blocky. A few seemed to be built from organic materials that pulsed with their own inner light. Sir, we're receiving communication requests from multiple vessels, Amy Carter reported from her position at the communications station. She had been promoted to commander over the years, but still served as Jake's primary communications officer. They're all using diplomatic frequencies and requesting permission to enter Earth space. How many ships are we talking about? Jake asked. Amy worked at her console for several minutes trying to get an accurate count. Sir, the number keeps changing as more arrive, but current count is over 1,000 vessels and climbing rapidly. Jake stared at the tactical display in disbelief. Where there had been empty space just hours before, ships were now appearing at an incredible rate. The computer system struggled to track and identify all the new arrivals as they took up positions around Earth. Most of them were designs that Earth's databases had never recorded before. Admiral Morrison, this is Trade Matriarch Kira Voss requesting permission to bring our fleet into Earth orbit. Jake activated his personal communication system. Permission granted, Matriarch. All allied vessels are welcome in Earth space. The first group of ships moved past Earth's defensive line and took up protective positions around the planet. Jake could see that they were well armed despite being primarily trading vessels. The Zilani had clearly prepared for the possibility of combat, even though their species preferred peaceful solutions to conflicts. Sir, we're receiving another communication, Amy reported. This one is from a species calling themselves the Korafi. A new face appeared on the main screen. The alien had blue-gray skin and large dark eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. When it spoke, its voice was deep and resonant like distant thunder. I am Admiral Lekmore of the Korathi Defense Fleet. We come to honor the debt we owe to humanity. Jake stepped forward. Admiral Lekmore, I appreciate your arrival, but I'm not sure what debt you're referring to. 30 years ago, a human medical team responded to a plague outbreak on our colony world, Korathi Prime. They worked for 6 months without rest to develop a cure that saved over 2 million lives. The leader of that team was Dr. Sarah Kim, who refused all payment and asked only that we remember the importance of helping others in need. Jake remembered reading about that mission in the historical records. Dr. Kim had indeed led a volunteer medical mission to help the Korathi, but it had been presented as simple humanitarian aid. He had no idea that the Korathi considered it a debt that needed repayment. Admiral, your people owe us nothing, Jake said. Dr. Kim and her team were just doing what doctors do, perhaps, Dekmore replied. But actions have consequences, and kindness creates bonds that last for generations. Today, the Korathi honor those bonds. More ships continued to arrive throughout the day. Each group brought their own story of human kindness that had occurred years or even decades earlier. The vegan fleet mistress spoke of human aid during a volcanic disaster that had threatened their capital city. The Altarian prince described how human engineers had helped rebuild their orbital shipyards after a terrorist attack. The pattern was always the same. Humans had helped someone in need without expecting anything in return, and now those beings were willing to fight and die to protect Earth. Sir, current count is over 4,000 allied vessels, Lisa reported. This is the largest fleet ever assembled in recorded history. Jake could barely comprehend the numbers. 4,000 ships was more than the entire hegemony force that was approaching Earth. But more importantly, it represented something that had never existed before in galactic history, a true alliance based on gratitude and shared values rather than military power or economic interests. A young ensign approached Jake with a priority message. Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the Hegemony Fleet. They're requesting to speak with the Earth Commander. Put them through. The face that appeared on screen belonged to Fleet Commander Axios of the Hegemony Forces. He was a member of the Draken species with scales instead of skin and eyes like burning coals. His expression showed confusion and perhaps a hint of concern. Admiral Morrison, I am Fleet Commander Axios. We were not aware that Earth had formed such extensive alliances. Our intelligence reports indicated that humanity was isolated and without significant military support. Jake looked at the alien commander and felt a surge of confidence that he had not experienced in months. Commander Axios, humans believe in helping others when they are in need. Over the years we have made many friends who share those values. This changes the strategic situation considerably, Axios admitted. We require time to reassess our plans and consult with Hegemony leadership. Take all the time you need, Jake replied. We'll be here waiting. The transmission ended, and Jake turned to look at the tactical display. Earth was now surrounded by thousands of ships from dozens of different species. Each vessel represented not just military power but also the proof that kindness and compassion could create bonds stronger than any formal treaty. Kira Voss appeared on his personal communication screen once again. Admiral, I told you that the Zilani never forget a kindness. What I did not tell you is that we are very good teachers. We have spent 15 years telling your story to anyone who would listen. Jake looked at the crystal pendant in his hand and finally understood. It's true. Power. It was not just a symbol of debt owed by one species, but a key that could unlock the gratitude of an entire galaxy. Kira, how many more ships are coming? As many as needed, Admiral. Word is still spreading and more fleets are on their way. By tomorrow you may have 6,000 ships or more. Jake shook his head in wonder. All because we rescued 43 people. No, Admiral, Kira corrected him gently. All because when you had a choice between doing what was safe and doing what was right, you chose to do what was right. That is a lesson the galaxy desperately needed to learn. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of Earth's flagship and watched in amazement as the largest fleet in galactic history took defensive positions around his homeworld. What had started as a desperate attempt to contact old friends had become something far beyond anything he could have imagined. Over 6,000 ships from 37 different species had answered the call for help, and more were still arriving. Every hour, the tactical display showed a three-dimensional map of the solar system, with each allied vessel marked in blue. The fleet formed multiple defensive rings around Earth, with the most heavily armed ships on the outer perimeter and support vessels closer to the planet. Jake had never seen so many different ship designs in one place. Some were sleek and elegant, while others were massive and industrial. A few seemed to defy the basic laws of physics with their strange curves and impossible angles. Commander Lisa Bennett approached his position with the latest status report. Sir, the fleet commanders are requesting a coordination meeting. With this many ships from different species, we need to establish unified command protocols. Jake nodded. Coordinating 6,000 ships would have been challenging enough if they were all human vessels using the same technology and communication systems. With dozens of different species involved, the task seemed almost impossible. Each group had their own languages, military traditions, and tactical preferences. Schedule a meeting for 2 hours from now, Jake said. I want representatives from every species present. We need to show the hegemony that we're not just a random collection of ships, but a real alliance with unified purpose. As Lisa left to organize the meeting, Jake received a priority communication from the long-range sensor station. Sir, the hegemony fleet has entered the outer system. Current count is 3,200 ships led by the Dreadnought. Conquest of Worlds. Jake felt his stomach tighten, despite the overwhelming numerical advantage his forces now enjoyed. The hegemony ships were built for war with advanced weapons and experienced crews. Many of the allied vessels were civilian ships that had been hastily converted for combat. Superior numbers would help, but the battle would still be dangerous for everyone involved. Time until they reach Earth orbit? Jake asked. Approximately 18 hours, sir. Jake activated his communication system and sent a message to all allied ships. This is Admiral Morrison to all fleet commanders. The hegemony forces will arrive tomorrow morning. I want every ship ready for combat, but I also want to try diplomatic contact first. These beings came here believing that humanity was alone and defenseless. Perhaps seeing our true strength will make them reconsider their goals. Over the next several hours, Jake met with dozens of alien commanders, each with their own story about why they had come to Earth's defense. Admiral Vecamore of the Korathi explained how his people had developed deep respect for human medical teams who had saved millions of lives during a plague outbreak. Fleet Mistress Yara of the Vegans described human engineers who had worked for months to restore power to her world after a natural disaster. Prince Malik of the Altarians spoke of human diplomats who had prevented a civil war through patient negotiation and compromise. The pattern was always the same. Humans had helped someone in need without asking for anything in return. Those acts of kindness had been remembered and shared, creating networks of gratitude that spanned the galaxy. When word spread that Earth was threatened, those networks had activated, bringing together the largest rescue fleet in recorded history. Captain Amy Carter, who now commanded her own ship, approached Jake with an urgent message. Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the Hegemony flagship. Fleet Commander Axios wants to speak with you personally. Jake took the communication in his private ready room. The scaled face of the Draken commander appeared on screen, looking considerably less confident than during their previous conversation. Behind him, Jake could see other Hegemony officers studying tactical displays with worried expressions. Admiral Morrison, Axios began slowly, we have spent the last day analyzing the fleet you have assembled. Our intelligence services are trying to understand how Earth managed to form such extensive alliances without our knowledge. Commander, we didn't form these alliances through treaties or military pacts, Jake replied. These beings are here because, over the years, humans have tried to help others when they needed help. Today, those others are returning the favor. Axios was quiet for several seconds before responding. Our original intelligence indicated that humanity was an aggressive species that would eventually threaten galactic stability. The response to our invasion suggests that assessment may have been incorrect. Humans can fight when we need to, Jake said firmly. But we prefer to solve problems through cooperation and mutual aid. The fleet you see around Earth represents the kind of galaxy we want to live in, where different species help each other instead of fighting endless wars. Admiral, our forces are outnumbered by almost 2-1, Axios admitted. Even with our technological advantages, the battle would be costly for both sides. The Hegemony Council is reconsidering our position. Jake leaned forward in his chair. Commander, I have a proposal. Instead of fighting a war that will cost thousands of lives on both sides, why don't we try to understand each other better? Send representatives to meet with our diplomatic teams. Learn about humanity from actual humans instead of intelligence. Reports, you would trust Hegemony diplomats aboard your ships, Axios asked with surprise. If you come in peace, then yes. The same principles that brought this fleet to Earth's defense also apply to former enemies who want to find a better way. Forward, the communication ended, and Jake returned to the command center where he found the bridge crew monitoring dozens of different channels. Reports were coming in from across the galaxy as word spread about the massive fleet that had assembled at Earth. Some species were expressing amazement while others were concerned about the shift in galactic power balance. Sir, we're receiving another message from the Hegemony fleet, Amy reported. They're requesting permission to send a diplomatic shuttle to the flagship. Permission granted, Jake replied. Have security teams standing by, but treat their representatives with full diplomatic courtesy. 6 hours later, Jake sat across a conference table from 3 Hegemony diplomats, including Fleet Commander Axios himself. The meeting was tense at first as both sides tested each other's intentions. But as the hours passed and stories were shared, the atmosphere gradually became more relaxed. Admiral, I must admit that everything we thought we knew about humanity appears to have been wrong, Axios said during a break in the formal negotiations. Our intelligence sources focused on human military capabilities and expansion into new territories. They never mentioned the humanitarian missions or aid programs. Maybe your sources were looking for threats instead of looking for the truth, Jake suggested. When you expect to find enemies everywhere, that's usually what you find. The negotiations continued for 3 days as both sides worked to find a peaceful solution. The hegemony leadership slowly accepted that humanity was not the aggressive threat they had believed. The massive fleet defending Earth was proof that humans had earned the respect and friendship of species across the galaxy through acts of kindness rather than military conquest. In the end, the hegemony agreed to withdraw their forces and establish formal diplomatic relations with Earth. Several member species of the Alliance decided to leave the hegemony entirely and form new partnerships with humanity based on mutual cooperation. Instead of military dominance, Jake stood on the observation deck of his flagship and watched as the last hegemony ships left the solar system. The Allied fleet was also beginning to disperse as the various species returned to their home worlds. But many had promised to maintain regular contact with Earth, and several had proposed joint scientific and cultural exchange programs. Kira Voss appeared on his personal communication screen one final time before her ships departed. Admiral Morrison, you have given the galaxy a great gift today. What gift is that? Jake asked. You have shown that it is possible to build alliances based on friendship and gratitude instead of fear and dominance. That lesson will spread just as the story of your kindness has spread. Jake looked down at the crystal pendant that had started everything. Kira, I want to thank you for keeping your promise. Without your help, humanity might not have survived, Admiral. The debt has not been repaid, Kira said with a smile. Saving 43 lives is a small thing compared to what you have accomplished. You have changed the nature of galactic civilization itself. The true debt we owe you can never be fully repaid as the Zalani ships disappeared into hyperspace. Jake reflected on the incredible chain of events that had led to this moment. A simple decision to answer a distress call 15 years ago had ultimately saved his entire species and created new possibilities for cooperation across the galaxy. He placed the crystal pendant back in its box, knowing that he would probably never need to use it again. The network of friendship and gratitude that had brought thousands of ships to Earth's defense would continue to grow and spread. Humanity had learned that the greatest strength came not from weapons or military might, but from the simple act of helping others when they needed help the most.